Have you ever heard of a case that just makes you stop and go, wait a minute, how did that happen?
Oh, yeah, I've got a few of those up my sleeve.
Well, get ready, because today we're diving into one that'll leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about guilt and innocence.
Sounds intriguing.
We're headed to Englewood, Chicago, back in the mid-1990s. A string of murders rocks the neighborhood.
And the prime suspect.
Hubert Geralds Jr. But hold on, because there's a twist. A shocking discovery turns this whole case upside down.
I'm already hooked. Let's get into it.
Okay, so we've got court documents, news articles, even prison records. This is your all-access pass to the wild ride. This is the case of Hubert Geralds Jr.
All right, so lay it on me. Who was Hubert Geralds Jr. and what brought him to Englewood?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. He was born November 13th, 1964. Now, details about his early life. Pretty scarce.
Okay, so a little bit of a mystery man right from the start.
But here's what we do know. Abandoned by his father, abused by his mother's boyfriend. Not exactly a picture of a happy childhood.
No, not at all. Sounds like he faced some serious adversity early on. Makes you wonder how those experiences might have shaped his path.
It's definitely a layer to consider. And the mystery deepens because there's this gap in what we know about him before Chicago. Record of him in a New York prison, but the details are murky.
So he kind of just appears in Chicago with a past shrouded in shadows.
Exactly. And he ends up serving 5 years for burglary in '92 in the city. Now, this is right around the time that a string of murders starts terrorizing Englewood, giving birth to this chilling name, the Englewood Strangler.
Oh, wow. So we're talking about a serial killer operating in the neighborhood.
Unfortunately, yes. Between 1994 and 95, 5 women, all sex workers, are found murdered, and Hubert Geralds Jr. becomes the prime suspect.
5 women. That's a lot of lives lost. We need to remember that those were real people with families and stories of their own.
Absolutely. Doretha Withers, Alonda Tart, Joyce Wilson, Millicent Peanut Jones, and Mary Blackman. Their lives mattered, and it's so important to acknowledge that as we go through this case.
I couldn't agree more. It's easy to get lost in the details of the investigation, but we can't forget the human cost.
So how did he do it? What was his MO?
From what we can tell, he'd lure his victims with crack cocaine, then use this specific chokehold, they called it the guardian angel chokehold, to strangle them.
The guardian angel chokehold? That's chilling. It just adds this layer of premeditation. It makes you question what was going on in his mind.
Right. Was this just about the drugs, or was there something more sinister at play?
Yeah, was it impulsive or was it calculated? And his connection to the sex work community, it's kind of unclear. We know some of the victims, but was he deeply involved in that world or more opportunistic?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something to keep in mind as we go forward.
Definitely. Now get this. June 18th, 1995,
Yeah.
Mary Blackman's body is found. Not just anywhere, but in a trash bin at the house she shared with Gerald's family.
Oh, wow, wait, so at his family's house?
Yeah, and it gets even crazier. It was his own sister, Angela, who tipped off the police. She suspected her brother might be involved.
Hold on, his own sister turned him in. Talk about family drama mixed with a murder investigation. That's intense.
Yeah, you can't make this stuff up. So now the police have their suspect and a pretty strong lead. What do you think happens next?
I guess they bring him in for questioning, right? See if he cracks under pressure.
You got it. Geralds is arrested and charged with 6 murders, plus 1 attempted murder. The stakes are high, to say the least.
6 murders. Whoa. So how does the defense even begin to approach a case like that?
They go for an insanity plea. Claim Geralds was mentally incompetent to understand his actions.
Interesting strategy. So what's their argument?
They point to a bunch of factors: mental retardation, possible brain damage, even paraphilia.
Paraphilia. So unusual sexual interests. I guess that could play a role in this.
Right. The idea is he wasn't fully in control of his actions, maybe driven by forces he didn't understand. And to bolster their case, his family testifies, painting this picture of a troubled childhood.
What kind of things did they say?
They talked about abuse, neglect, instances of self-harm, like he was detached from reality, struggling for a long time.
Powerful stuff. Makes you feel for the guy, even with the awful things he's accused of. But I bet the prosecution wasn't buying it.
Oh, they were having none of it. They argued that he was fully aware of what he was doing and was just trying to manipulate the system, painted him as a calculated threat to society.
Classic legal battle, right? 2 sides, 2 completely different interpretations of the same guy, so who's the jury going to believe?
That's the question. And right in the middle of all this is Clenshaw Hopes, the only known survivor of Gerald's attacks. her story becomes a key piece of the puzzle.
I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for her to come forward and testify.
It took incredible strength and courage. She recounts the terror, the choking, being abducted, her fight to survive. It's a harrowing account.
Wow, her story must have had a huge impact on the courtroom.
It did. But the defense, they try to poke holes in her story, point out inconsistencies in her statements to the police, argue that trauma can distort memories.
Oh, I see, trying to cast doubt on her reliability as a witness.
Exactly. They're basically saying, can we really trust her memories given the trauma she experienced? It throws this whole other issue into the mix. How accurate can eyewitness testimony be, especially in a case as traumatic as this?
That's a tough one. Memory's a tricky thing, especially when you're dealing with something so horrific.
It really is. So you've got the defense trying to undermine Hope's testimony, the prosecution pushing for a conviction, and this whole debate about memory and trauma going on underneath it all.
So much complexity, so many layers. What's the verdict?
After a 3-week trial, the jury finds Hubert Geralds Jr. guilty on all charges.
Yeah.
And the judge, he hands down a death sentence.
Wow, the ultimate punishment. Case closed, right?
You'd think so, but remember I mentioned a twist. We're just getting started.
Okay, now you've really got me on the edge of my seat. What happens next?
Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture in Illinois at that time. It'll help set the stage for this unbelievable turn of events.
All right, let's do it. Tell me more about what was going on in Illinois back then. How might that have affected things?
Well, think about it. Late 1990s, early 2000s. The death penalty was still very much a reality in the U.S., and Illinois was no exception.
Right, it was a different time. The death penalty wasn't as controversial as it is today.
And while Geralds is on death row, there's this growing movement across the country, people questioning the ethics of capital punishment.
Yeah, it's starting to see more and more of that. The debate's heating up.
So you've got this legal drama with Gerald, but in the background, there's this bigger societal shift happening. And that, my friend, is where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's get into it. So Gerald's is sitting on death row, the death penalty debate's raging all around him, and then bam, something happens that no one saw coming.
Okay, lay it on me. What's this twist that changes everything?
Another serial killer gets caught in Englewood.
Wait, another one. At the same time. Are you serious? Englewood had 2 serial killers operating at the same time.
Yep, and this guy, his name's Andre Crawford. He starts confessing to murders. A whole bunch of them.
Okay, so another serial killer's off the streets. But how does this affect Gerald's?
Well, one of the murders Crawford confesses to is Rhonda King's.
Hold on, Rhonda King. She was one of the victims Gerald's was convicted of killing.
You got it.
So what? They just ignore this confession from Crawford?
No, they take it very seriously. And here's the kicker. DNA evidence pops up, and guess what?
It matches Crawford.
Exactly. Crawford's DNA is all over the Rhonda King crime scene.
That's insane. So what happens to Gerald's? They just let him go, right?
Well, not so fast. The prosecution has to vacate Gerald's conviction for Rhonda King's murder.
Okay, that makes sense. But he's still got to be in trouble for the other murders, right?
You're right. He's still facing charges for those 5 other murders and the attempted murder.
So he's cleared of one, but still facing death row for the rest. That's wild. What happens next?
Well, they decide to retry him for the remaining murders now that the Rhonda King case is out of the picture.
A second trial? You've got to be kidding me.
It's a pretty rare thing. And with this second trial, the defense changes their strategy.
Oh, how so?
They start arguing that Gerald's confessions to the other murders, well, they were coerced.
Coerced? You mean like forced out of him?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They claim he was vulnerable during the interrogations, maybe his mental state made him more susceptible to pressure, and he might have just confessed to things he didn't actually do.
That's interesting. So they're basically saying the cops bullied him into confessing.
In a way, yeah. They argued that his low IQ made him easy to manipulate, especially by authority figures.
I can see that. So the cops basically took advantage of him.
That's what the defense was going for, trying to cast doubt on the validity of his confessions.
What did the prosecution have to say about all of this?
They stuck to their guns. They insisted that Geralds was guilty of the remaining murders, that his confessions were legit. Pointed to the fact that he could express himself clearly, his handwriting was good, proof that he was mentally sound, fully aware of what he was doing.
Okay, so round 2 of this courtroom battle. Defense saying he confessed under duress, prosecution maintaining his guilt. What happens next?
As this trial's moving forward, something huge happens outside the courtroom.
Oh.
Tell me more.
Remember that debate about the death penalty we talked about? The one that was gaining momentum?
Yeah, what about it?
Well, it reached the governor's office. In 2000, Governor George Ryan decided to do something pretty drastic.
I bet I know what's coming. He puts a moratorium on the death penalty.
You've got it. A total halt to executions in Illinois. And it's not like he was always against the death penalty either. But after all these high-profile cases where innocent people were almost executed, he just couldn't stomach it anymore.
Wow, so what does this mean for Geralds?
His sentence gets commuted to life in prison without parole. So no death penalty, but still stuck behind bars for life. What a roller coaster ride.
It really is. It makes you think, doesn't it?
It definitely does. So where do things go from here? Geralds gets his life spared, but he's still behind bars, cleared of one murder, convicted of others. It just feels unfinished somehow.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange ending, isn't it? Well, after his sentence is commuted, he's transferred to Menard Correctional Center in Illinois.
Menard, that's maximum security, right?
Yep, and he's still there today.
It's crazy to think about it. He escapes the death penalty, but he's essentially serving a life sentence anyway.
It's a unique outcome for sure, and it just goes to show how individual lives can get swept up in these bigger societal changes, you know?
Like his fate was decided by things completely outside of his control. It's a real reminder that the legal system, it aims for justice, but it's not perfect. There's always room for error, for things to go wrong.
And sometimes those mistakes can have huge consequences.
Exactly. And what about Clenshaw Hopes, the survivor? I mean, she had to relive that trauma, not once, but twice during those trials.
Oh man, that's right. We can't forget about her. She showed incredible strength facing her attacker in court like that. It makes you wonder how she coped with it all, you know? How do you move on after something so horrific?
It's a good question. I mean, the psychological impact of something like that must be immense.
No doubt. It really highlights the human cost of these cases, beyond just the legal battles and the headlines.
Absolutely. And her story, it reminds us that behind every case, every verdict, there are real people whose lives are forever changed.
It also makes you think about eyewitness testimony, how important it is, but also how tricky it can be, especially with trauma involved.
Right. Like the defense tried to discredit her, but her core story, it never wavered. It shows the power of that lived experience, you know?
For sure. It's a reminder that we need to be careful to consider all the angles when we're dealing with sensitive cases like this.
And let's not forget about the role of DNA evidence in all of this.
Yeah.
If Crawford hadn't confessed and they hadn't done the DNA testing, Geralds could still be on death row for a murder he didn't commit.
It's scary to think about.
It really is. DNA testing has been a game changer for the justice system. It's helped to right so many wrongs.
Yeah, it's given us this level of certainty we never had before. It can clear the innocent and make sure the guilty are held accountable.
It makes you think about all those cases before DNA testing, all those potential miscarriages of justice.
It's a sobering thought. We should always be looking back, re-examining old cases, using the tools we have now to make sure justice is served.
And then there's the death penalty itself. The fact that Geralds could have been executed for something he didn't do, that's heavy stuff.
It raises serious ethical questions. Can we really justify taking a life when there's even a sliver of doubt?
The death penalty is a big debate, a lot of strong opinions on both sides. Cases like this definitely make you think long and hard about the consequences.
It's not a decision to be made lightly.
So, what have we learned from this deep dive into Hubert Geralds Jr.'s story? What should people take away from all of this?
It shows us how complicated the justice system can be, how individual lives can intersect with these bigger societal issues. We've got the forensics, the legal arguments, the ethical questions, and of course, the human element. It all comes together in this one case.
It's a story about more than just guilt or innocence. It's about the pursuit of truth, even when it's messy and unpredictable.
And it reminds us that the fight for justice never really ends. We have to keep pushing, keep questioning, and keep demanding better.
That's a great point to end on. The case of Hubert Geralds Jr., it's a twisted journey, full of surprises, and it leaves us with a lot to ponder. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.
Anytime. Always fascinating to explore these complex cases and see what we can learn from them.